The sleek black Amex card, the one he'd always called their dream builder, slid silently through the machine. But the dream it was funding wasn't theirs. As I stood in the cavernous, empty shell of our home, the stark white of an eviction notice was a ghostly stain on the wall. A different reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. Just across town, in a sun-drenched loft with views of the city skyline, the scent of expensive perfume, not packing tape, filled the air. He was paying her rent with our future, while I and our unborn child were being thrown onto the street. Eleanor, or Ellie as everyone called her, believed she was living a modern-day fairy tale. At 28, she was married to the man of her dreams, Liam, a charismatic and ambitious financial analyst who seemed to conjure success out of thin air. They lived in a stunning pre-war brownstone in Brooklyn's prestigious Park Slope, a neighborhood where old-world charm met new-world money. Their life was a carefully curated collection of beautiful moments. Weekend trips to the Hamptons, reservations at impossible-to-get restaurants like the world-renowned Per Se, and a social calendar that was the envy of their peers. Ellie, a talented illustrator whose whimsical designs graced the pages of children's books, had willingly put her career on the back burner. Liam, with his easy smile and confident demeanor, had convinced her that his work was more than enough to support them, especially with a baby on the way. "I'm building an empire for us," he'd said, his eyes sparkling with a sincerity she never thought to question. And so, she channeled her creative energies into creating the perfect home, a sanctuary of love and warmth for their growing family. The nursery was a testament to her devotion. Hand-painted murals of gentle, smiling giraffes and hot air balloons drifted across the pale yellow walls. A vintage rocking chair, a treasured heirloom from her grandmother, sat in the corner, a hand-knitted blanket draped expectantly over its arm. Every detail was infused with love, a tangible manifestation of her hopes and dreams for the child nestled safely beneath her heart. She was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of her belly was a constant, comforting reminder of the new life she was about to bring into the world. She'd never been happier, or so she thought. The first crack in her gilded cage appeared subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, sun-drenched autumn day that made New York City feel like the center of the universe. Ellie was watering her collection of orchids, their vibrant petals a splash of exotic beauty against the exposed brick of their living room, when the mail arrived. Tucked between a glossy catalog from a high-end baby boutique and a handwritten note from her mother was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, just a stark, impersonal window revealing their names and address. She slid it open with a casual flick of her wrist, her mind already drifting to the organic cotton onesies she'd been eyeing online. But the words that leaped out at her from the page made the breath catch in her throat. "Final notice," it screamed in bold red letters. Eviction proceedings to be initiated. It had to be a mistake, a cruel bureaucratic error. They were the golden couple, the ones who had it all. People like them didn't get evicted. Liam handled all the finances, a domain he gently but firmly insisted was his responsibility. He was meticulous, organized, and brilliant with numbers. A man who could dissect the complexities of the stock market in his sleep wouldn't simply forget to pay the rent on their multi-million-dollar home. She tried to call him, her fingers trembling as she dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Liam, darling, it's me," she began, her voice a little higher, a little more strained than usual. "I just received the strangest letter. It says we're being evicted. It's obviously a mistake, but it's a bit unsettling. Call me back when you get this." She spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety, her earlier contentment shattered. She tried to distract herself by organizing the baby's clothes, the tiny garments a stark contrast to the ugliness of the letter that now lay on the kitchen counter like a venomous snake in her domestic paradise. But every time she folded a miniature sock or a soft flannel swaddle, the word evicted echoed in her mind. Liam didn't call back. As afternoon bled into evening, The golden hour light that usually filled their apartment with a magical glow seemed only to highlight the dust motes dancing in the air. A new and unfamiliar feeling began to creep into Ellie's heart. Doubt. It was a cold, slithering thing coiling itself around the edges of her carefully constructed world. She had always trusted Liam implicitly. His confidence was her anchor, his ambition her security. But now, in the unnerving silence of their beautiful, possibly soon-to-be former home, she began to see things in a different light. The late nights at the office he claimed were spent closing a big deal. The hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room, his voice a low, urgent murmur. The way he'd become increasingly protective of his phone and laptop, angling them away from her whenever she came near. She had dismissed it all as the stress of his high-pressure job. She'd made excuses for them, because the alternative was simply unthinkable. Just as she was about to try his number again, her own phone buzzed. It was a text from him. "Sorry, honey. Swamped in meetings. Everything okay?" The casualness of his message, the complete lack of concern, was like a douse of cold water. "Everything okay?" A bitter laugh bubbled up in her throat. She typed back, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Everything is not okay. We got an eviction notice. I've been trying to call you all day. What is going on?" The three little dots that indicated he was typing appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came through. "It's a mix-up with the landlord. A clerical error. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. I'll sort it out tomorrow. I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." The condescending words, once a term of endearment, now felt like a slap in the face. He was dismissing her, treating her like a child who couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of the real world he had so carefully constructed for her. That night, for the first time in her marriage, Ellie didn't sleep in their plush king-size bed. Instead, she sat in the vintage rocking chair in the nursery, the eviction notice clutched in her hand, the hand-painted giraffes on the wall seeming to mock her with their gentle, unblinking eyes. The gilded cage had become a prison, and she was starting to realize that the man she had married might not be her Prince Charming, but her jailer. And as the city that never sleeps hummed its relentless lullaby outside her window, a single, terrifying question began to form in her mind. If the money wasn't going to their rent, where was it going? The answer, she suspected, lay somewhere in the digital labyrinth of Liam's life, a world he had so carefully shielded from her view. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the Brooklyn skyline, a new and steely resolve hardened in Ellie's heart. She would find the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Her fairy tale was over. It was time to wake up. The next morning, the city awoke to a world washed clean by an overnight shower. But for Ellie, everything remained shrouded in a murky fog of suspicion. Liam had slipped into bed in the early hours, smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't recognize and the stale scent of a lie. He'd mumbled something about a celebratory dinner with clients, a deal finally sealed. He didn't mention the eviction notice, and when Ellie, feigning sleep, had remained silent, he seemed to take it as a sign that his placating text had worked. He was already in the shower when she slipped out of bed, her mind whirring with a desperate plan. His laptop. It was his digital fortress, the one place he guarded more fiercely than anything else. She knew his password, or at least she thought she did. It was supposed to be the date of their anniversary, a romantic detail that now seemed sickeningly ironic. She tiptoed into his home office, a space that was usually off-limits to her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sleek silver laptop sat on the polished mahogany desk, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. She lifted the lid, her breath held tight in her chest. The screen lit up, displaying a login prompt. She typed in their anniversary date. Incorrect password. Her heart sank. He had changed it. The realization was another small, sharp betrayal. When had he changed it and why? Frantically, she tried other combinations. His birthday, her birthday, the name of his childhood pet. Nothing worked. Defeated, she was about to close the laptop when her eyes fell on a small leather-bound notebook tucked away on a bookshelf. It was his old journal, one he'd kept during their first year together. She'd always teased him about it, his anachronistic attachment to pen and paper in a digital age. She flipped through the pages, a wave of nostalgia washing over her as she saw her own name intertwined with his in the margins. And then, on the last page, she found it, a series of seemingly random letters and numbers scrawled in his familiar looping handwriting. Underneath it, in parentheses, were 2 words, new key. With trembling fingers, she typed the new password into the laptop. It worked. The screen unlocked, revealing his desktop, a clean, organized interface that belied the chaos bubbling beneath the surface. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt. This was a gross violation of his privacy. But the eviction notice, still lying on her nightstand, was a stark reminder of what was at stake. Her home, her child's future. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she saw it. She started with his emails, scanning through subject lines, her eyes darting over endless chains of work-related correspondence. Then she saw a folder labeled Personal. Her heart leaped in her throat. She clicked it open. The contents were a mundane collection of online shopping receipts, travel confirmations, and newsletters. She was about to give up when a subfolder, innocuously titled Apartment, caught her eye. She opened it, and the world tilted on its axis. Inside was a series of emails from a real estate agent detailing the lease agreement for a luxury loft apartment in Soho. The monthly rent was a staggering $10,000. The tenant's name was listed as Isabella Rossi, and the payments, she saw with a growing sense of nausea, were being made from a bank account she had never heard of, an account that was clearly, undeniably Liam's. She clicked on a link in one of the emails, a virtual tour of the apartment. The camera panned across a sun-drenched living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances, and a bedroom with a king-size bed and a balcony overlooking the city. It was the kind of apartment you saw in magazines, a fantasy home for a fantasy Lithia life. Liam was apparently living with someone else. Isabella Rossi. The name was unfamiliar, and yet it felt like a physical blow. Who was she? And why was Liam paying for her extravagant lifestyle while their own home was being foreclosed? The questions swirled in Ellie's mind, a vortex of confusion and betrayal. She dug deeper, her search now more focused, more frantic. She opened his bank statements, the ones from the secret account. The transactions told a story that was both sordid and heartbreakingly clear. There were charges from high-end restaurants she'd never been to, receipts from designer boutiques she could only dream of shopping at, and a recurring monthly payment to a high-end floral delivery service. It was a paper trail of an affair, a meticulously documented chronicle of his deception. And then she saw the charge that made her blood run cold. A payment of $5,000 to a name she recognized, Dr. Catherine Alistair, one of New York's top obstetricians. An obstetrician that was not her own. The date of the payment was just 2 weeks ago. The implication was so monstrous, so utterly devastating, that she couldn't process it at first. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. But the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a picture of a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter her completely. Isabella Rossi was not just his mistress. She was pregnant. The sound of the shower turning off jolted her back to the present. She quickly closed the laptop, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. She had to get out of there, had to get away from him, from a life that was now a lie. She grabbed her purse and her keys, her mind a blank slate of shock and grief. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in that house, in that life, for one more second. As she opened the front door, Liam emerged from the bedroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, a cheerful smile on his face. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice a jovial melody that grated on her raw nerves. "I was just about to make you some pancakes. You and the little one must be hungry." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. The handsome face she had once adored now seemed like a grotesque mask hiding a monster underneath. The charming smile, the sparkling eyes, the easy confident seat was all a performance, a carefully crafted illusion designed to deceive her. "I know, Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the morning stillness like a shard of glass. "I know everything." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a flash of anger. "What are you talking about?" he blustered, his voice losing its easy cadence. "Isabella Rossi," she said, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. "The loft in Soho. The bank account. The other baby." The color drained from his face. He stood there, exposed and stripped of his lies, the towel around his waist his only flimsy defense. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the room was the frantic beating of Ellie's own heart. And then he did something she never would have expected. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even try to deny it. He simply shrugged, a gesture of such casual indifference that it was more shocking than any confession. "So, you found out," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "I was wondering how long it would take you." The callousness of his words, the complete lack of remorse, was the final, brutal blow. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, the man who was the father of her child, was a stranger. A cruel, heartless stranger who had not only betrayed her, but had done so with a chilling lack of regard for her, for their marriage, for their unborn baby. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the brownstone, a final, definitive end to her fairy tale. She was homeless, heartbroken, and pregnant. And as she walked down the tree-lined streets of Park Slope, the tears that had been threatening to fall finally began to stream down her face, each one a testament to the life that had been stolen from her. The unraveling thread had led her to a truth more devastating than she could have ever imagined, and now she had to figure out how to weave a new life from the tattered remains of her old one. The world outside the brownstone felt alien, hostile. The familiar, comforting streets of her neighborhood were now a labyrinth of judgment. Every passing stranger, a potential witness to her humiliation. Ellie walked for hours, a ghost in her own life, her mind a maelstrom of shock, grief, and a white-hot rage that was starting to smolder beneath the surface. The baby, as if sensing her distress, was unervingly still. Her first instinct was to call her mother, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. How could she articulate the sheer magnitude of Liam's betrayal? How could she explain that her perfect husband was a monster, her perfect life a sham? The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She ended up at a small, anonymous coffee shop in a part of the city she rarely visited, the bitter taste of cheap coffee a fitting accompaniment to the bitterness in her soul. She sat there for hours, her phone a dead weight in her purse. Liam had called her a dozen times, his initial panic presumably turning into a desperate attempt at damage control. He had also sent a barrage of texts, each one more pathetic than the last. "Ellie, please come home. We need to talk. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but I love you." The words "I love you" were so obscene, so utterly devoid of meaning, that she wanted to smash her phone against the wall. Love wasn't this. Love wasn't paying for another woman's luxury apartment while your pregnant wife faced eviction. Love wasn't a secret bank account, a secret life, a secret baby. As the day wore on, her shock began to morph into a cold, hard pragmatism. She was homeless. She was pregnant. And she had no money. Liam had controlled every aspect of their finances, and her own savings had been depleted long ago, absorbed into the black hole of their shared expenses. She had one option, a lifeline she was reluctant to grasp, but had no choice but to take. Her best friend, Chloe, a fiercely independent art gallery owner who had never been Liam's biggest fan. Chloe had always been wary of his smooth charm and effortless success. Her artists, I seeing through the glossy veneer to the emptiness beneath. Ellie had always defended him, blinded by love. Now, Chloe's skepticism seemed like a prescient warning she had been too foolish to heed. She called Chloe, her voice cracking as she tried to explain the situation. Chloe didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." An hour later, Ellie was ensconced in the spare bedroom of Chloe's stylish, art-filled apartment in Chelsea, a world away from the cloying domesticity of the brownstone. Chloe, with her sharp, asymmetrical haircut and no-nonsense demeanor, was a whirlwind of efficiency. She made tea. She ordered food. She listened without judgment as Ellie, in a halting, broken voice, recounted the events of the last 24 hours. "The bastard," Chloe said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "The absolute unmitigated bastard." But even as Chloe's righteous anger provided a strange sort of comfort, the reality of her situation was beginning to set in. The eviction notice wasn't just a threat. It was a ticking clock. And Liam, she knew, would not make this easy. He was a man who cared about appearances above all else, and a messy, public divorce would tarnish the perfect image he had so carefully cultivated. Her fears were confirmed the next day. A sleek black car, the kind that reeked of expensive lawyers, pulled up outside Chloe's building. A man in a tailored suit delivered a letter to Ellie. It was from Liam's lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, full of veiled threats and carefully worded accusations. It claimed that Ellie was emotionally unstable, that her erratic behavior was a danger to herself and her unborn child, and that Liam was deeply concerned for her well-being. It was a transparent attempt to paint her as the villain, to seize control of the narrative before she had a chance to tell her side of the story. But the most chilling part of the letter was the final paragraph. It stated that Liam was filing for sole custody of the baby, citing her instability as the primary reason. The words swam before Ellie's eyes. He was going to take her baby, the child she had nurtured and protected for 7 months. The only good thing to come out of the wreckage of her marriage. The rage that had been smoldering inside her finally erupted, a volcanic explosion of pure, unadulterated fury. "He is not getting my baby," she said, her voice low and trembling with an intensity that surprised even herself. "I will not let him." That night, she couldn't sleep. The hand-painted giraffes from the nursery seemed to haunt her, their gentle smiles now twisted into mocking leers. She thought of the vintage rocking chair, the hand-knitted blanket, the life she had so lovingly prepared for her child. And she thought of Isabella Rossi, in her sun-drenched loft with her high-end obstetrician and her designer baby clothes, living the life that should have been hers. A new and dangerous idea began to form her mind. She needed to see her. She needed to understand who this woman was, this woman who had so completely and utterly destroyed her life. It was a reckless, irrational impulse born of desperation and a burning need for answers. But it was an impulse she couldn't ignore. The next day, she took the subway to Soho. The neighborhood, with its trendy boutiques and art galleries, felt like a different planet. She found the address from the lease agreement, a sleek, modern building with a doorman who looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She didn't try to go in. She just waited across the street in a small park, her pregnant belly a stark contrast to the effortless glamour of the people who streamed in and out of the building. She waited for hours, her resolve hardening with every passing minute. And then she saw her. Isabella Rossi was everything Ellie was not. She was tall and slender with long, raven hair and a model's cheekbones. She was dressed in a chic black maternity dress that managed to look both elegant and expensive. She moved with an easy, confident grace, a woman who was used to being looked at, to being admired. But as she got closer, Ellie saw something else. She saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint lines of worry around her mouth. She saw the way she clutched her own, much smaller baby bump, a gesture that was both protective and strangely vulnerable. And then Ellie saw the man who was walking beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. It wasn't Liam. It was a man she recognized from the high society pages of the glossy magazines Liam used to leave lying around their apartment. He was Marco Moretti, a wealthy and notoriously ruthless real estate mogul. A man who was old enough to be Isabella's father. A man who was also, as Ellie knew from the same gossip columns, very, very married. The world, which had already tilted on its axis, seemed to spin completely out of control. The story she had constructed in her mind, the simple, sordid tale of a cheating husband and a home-wrecking mistress, was suddenly infinitely more complex, infinitely more dangerous. Liam wasn't just having an affair. He was entangled in something much bigger, something that involved one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city. And Isabella Rossi, the woman she had come to hate with every fiber of her being, was not just his mistress. She was a pawn in a much larger game, a game whose rules Ellie was only just beginning to understand. As she watched Marco Moretti help a heavily pregnant Isabella into a waiting limousine, a new and terrifying thought occurred to her. Liam wasn't paying for the loft because he was in love with Isabella. He was paying for it because he was being forced to. He was being blackmailed. The realization did not bring her any comfort. It only deepened the mystery and the danger. Her descent into the dark underbelly of Liam's life was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun, and she was starting to realize that the eviction from her home might be the least of her problems. She had stumbled into a world of power, money, and secrets, a world where people like her were disposable. And she knew with a chilling certainty that she was not just fighting for her baby anymore. She was fighting for her life. The revelation that Isabella Rossi was not Liam's lover, but the mistress of the formidable Marco Moretti, sent Ellie reeling. She stumbled back to Chloe's apartment in a daze, the city's cacophony a dull roar in her ears. This wasn't a simple story of infidelity. It was a tangled web of power, deceit, and she was beginning to suspect criminality. Liam, her once brilliant, ambitious husband, was not a predator. He was prey. This new understanding didn't absolve him. It didn't erase the eviction notice, the stolen money, or the chilling indifference in his eyes when she had confronted him. But it recontextualized his actions, painting them not as acts of malicious cruelty, but of desperate self-preservation. He was a man in a cage, and he had been chewing off his own leg to escape. Blackmail, Chloe breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination as Ellie laid out her discovery. It's the only thing that makes sense. Moretti is a shark. He's notorious. If he has something on Liam, he would squeeze him for every last penny. But what could a man like Marco Moretti, a titan of industry with a net worth that dwarfed Liam's wildest ambitions, possibly want from a mid-level financial analyst? The rent on the Soho loft, while astronomical to Ellie, would be pocket change to him. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about sending a message. Driven by a new, more urgent purpose, Ellie returned to the digital labyrinth of Liam's laptop. This time, she wasn't looking for evidence of an affair. She was looking for the leverage Moretti held over him. She delved deeper into his work files, into encrypted folders and password-protected spreadsheets that she had previously ignored. She spent hours navigating complex financial jargon, her mind sharpened by adrenaline and a primal need to understand, slowly piecing together the puzzle. And then she found it, a hidden file buried deep within the server of Liam's firm, labeled simply M Project. It was a detailed record of a massive money laundering scheme, a complex network of offshore accounts and shell corporations designed to wash millions of dollars of illicit funds. And at the center of it all was Marco Moretti. The file showed that Liam, in his insatiable hunger for success, had become entangled with Moretti early in his career. He had been the architect of the scheme, the brilliant young analyst who had designed the system that made Moretti's dirty money clean. He had been handsomely rewarded, his rapid ascent in the financial world fueled by the very scheme that was now his prison. He had built their beautiful life, their gilded cage, on a foundation of criminality. The eviction, the drained bank accounts, the desperate scramble for cash hit all made a horrifying kind of sense. Moretti was bleeding him dry, not for the money itself, but to ensure his silence, to keep him tethered and compliant. The Soho loft was a symbol of his servitude, a constant, tangible reminder of who was in control. And Isabella Rossi, the pregnant mistress, was the human collateral. The knowledge was a double-edged sword. It explained everything, but it also plunged Ellie into a new level of terror. This was no longer a domestic drama. It was a federal crime, If this came to light, Liam would go to prison for a very long time. Their lives and the life of their unborn child would be irrevocably destroyed. She was trapped. If she exposed Liam, she would be condemning the father of her child to a life behind bars. If she did nothing, she would be at the mercy of a ruthless criminal and a husband who had already proven he would sacrifice her to save himself. As she sat there, the damning evidence glowing on the laptop screen, a sudden sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was a Braxton Hicks contraction, a false alarm, but it was a visceral reminder of the real, innocent life at the center of this sordid mess. Her baby, her son. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear, the anger, the sense of betrayal, they were all still there, but they were now overshadowed by a fierce, primal instinct to protect her child. She would not let him be born into this chaos. She would not let his life be defined by the sins of his father. She closed the laptop. She knew what she had to do. The next day, she called Liam, not with the tearful pleas of a wronged wife, but with the cold, calculated precision of a woman who had just stared into the abyss and had not blinked. "We need to meet," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My terms. Neutral ground." They met at a quiet, anonymous diner in Midtown, a place devoid of memories, a sterile environment for the surgery that was about to take place. Liam looked terrible. He was pale and gaunt, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hunted look. He started to speak, the familiar, pathetic apologies tumbling from his lips. Ellie held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear it." "Liam," she said, her voice like ice. "I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here for a deal." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a post-nuptial agreement drafted by a lawyer Chloe had found, a bulldog of a woman who specialized in contentious divorces. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Liam would sign over the brownstone to her, free and clear. He would set up a trust fund for the baby, a significant sum that would ensure his future regardless of what happened to Liam. And he would agree to her having sole, undisputed custody of their child. He would have visitation rights, but they would be at her discretion. In return, she would not go to the police. She would not expose the M Project. She would give him the one thing he so desperately craved, a chance to disappear, to extricate himself from the web he had woven. He stared at the paper, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You know," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I know everything," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I know about Moretti. I know about the money laundering. I know that your entire life is a house of cards, and I am the one person who can pull the pin." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved. She saw not the monster, not the jailer, but a terrified, broken man who had made a deal with the devil and had been paying the price ever since. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" "For him," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "He deserves a father, even a flawed one, and he deserves a life free from this filth. I am giving you a chance to give him that. It's more than you deserve." Tears welled in his eyes, tears of gratitude, of shame, of a profound and devastating loss. He took the pen she offered, his hand trembling, and signed the document. As Ellie walked out of the diner and back into the harsh light of the city, she did not feel a sense of triumph. She felt only a profound and aching sadness. She had won. She had secured her home, her baby's future, her freedom. But the victory felt hollow. She had saved her family by destroying it. She had thought that discovering the truth would be the end of her ordeal, but she was starting to realize that the truth was just the beginning. The house of cards had fallen, but the pieces were still scattered around her. And now, she had to somehow find the strength to build a new life from the ruins. A life for herself and for the son who would soon be in her arms. The son who would never know the full, terrible story of how he came into the world. And for that, at least, she was grateful. The weeks that followed were a maelstrom of legal proceedings and a profound, echoing loneliness. The post-nuptial agreement was executed with a swiftness that underscored Liam's desperation to disappear. Lawyers exchanged documents, and Ellie signed papers that felt heavier than their flimsy weight suggested, each signature a definitive stroke erasing a chapter of her life. The deed to the Park Slope brownstone was officially transferred into her name. A substantial, impenetrable trust fund was established for the baby. And just like that, Liam vanished. His phone number became a dead end. His social media profiles were scrubbed from the internet. He was a ghost she no longer wished to chase. Moving back into the brownstone was surreal. The house, once a symbol of her stolen life, now felt like hard-won, reclaimed territory. Yet, it was undeniably haunted. The faint scent of Liam's sandalwood cologne clung to the air in the master closet. The silence in the large rooms was a suffocating reminder of his absence. Chloe, her steadfast friend, became her anchor. "This isn't just a house, Ellie," Chloe said, her voice firm but kind. "It's your castle, and right now, it needs a new queen to banish the old king's ghosts." Together, they embarked on a mission to purge the house of Liam. They packed his tailored suits, his designer shoes, and his pretentious first editions into cardboard boxes destined for charity. They rearranged furniture, and Ellie found herself sketching ideas for new, brighter paint colors. Slowly, painstakingly, the house began to transform from a mausoleum of a shared past into the cradle of a singular, uncertain, but determined future. But even as she reclaimed her space, the tentacles of Liam's betrayal reached out one last time. A thick, official-looking envelope from their bank arrived. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. It was a foreclosure notice. The mortgage on the brownstone was months in arrears. Liam, in his frantic bid to appease Moretti, had systematically bled every single one of their accounts dry. The house was legally hers, but it was teetering on the brink of being repossessed. The Ellie of a few months prior would have crumpled. But this new Ellie, forged in the crucible of betrayal, did not break. She took a deep, steadying breath, made a strong cup of chamomile tea, and opened her laptop. She possessed a secret weapon, a dormant talent she had lovingly set aside years ago. Before Liam, she had been Eleanor Vance, a brilliant and sought-after illustrator. Publishers and design firms had been clamoring for her unique style. Now, ironically, her art, the very thing she had sacrificed for him, was her only path to salvation. The subsequent weeks were a blur of intense, almost feverish creativity. She converted a sunlit guest room into a studio, her grief, anger, and fierce love for her unborn son pouring out onto the Bristol board. She created entire worlds populated by brave little animals and resilient young heroes who, much like herself, discovered their innate strength when faced with daunting adversity. There was Pip, the timid field mouse who learned to roar, and Luna, the little lost star who found her way home by sharing her light. She curated a portfolio and dispatched it to every publisher and agent she could find. The rejections arrived first, a disheartening stream of polite no's. But Ellie, fueled by a desperation more potent than any fear of failure, persisted. And then, one crisp Tuesday morning, her phone rang. It was a senior editor from a small, highly respected publisher, a woman named Agnes Periwinkle, who had been utterly captivated by the raw emotion and whimsical beauty of her work. Agnes didn't just want to publish one book. She wanted a whole series based on the resilient animal characters Ellie had created. The advance they offered wasn't a king's ransom, but it was a lifeline. More importantly, it was a resounding declaration of her independence, earned through her own merit. It was the first cornerstone of her new life, laid by her own hands. A month later, just as the first green shoots of spring were pushing defiantly through the cold ground of the city's parks, Ellie went into labor. She gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy with a full shock of dark hair and his mother's fiercely observant eyes. She named him Noah, a name that signified rest and peace, because that is what he had brought her amidst the devastating storm. 2 years later, the Park Slope brownstone was no longer a castle under siege, but a kingdom of light and laughter. The somber tones were gone, replaced by warm yellows and soft blues. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the colorful, happy clutter of a toddler's life. Noah, now a boisterous 2-year-old with his mother's artistic flair and a boundless love for finger painting, chased sunbeams across the polished hardwood floors. On the built-in bookshelves in the living room, nestled among classic works of literature, were 4 of Ellie's own books. The Adventures of Pip the Brave Mouse had become a runaway success, celebrated for its gentle wisdom and stunning illustrations. The advance had long since cleared the mortgage, and the royalties provided a comfortable, stable life she had built entirely on her own. One quiet afternoon, with Noah sleepy from a day of play, Ellie settled into the vintage rocking chair in his room. The hand-painted giraffes still smiled down from the walls, but now they seemed less like mocking observers and more like old, trusted friends. She picked up a well-worn copy of her first book and opened it on her lap. Once upon a time, she began, her voice soft and sure, in a very big world, there lived a very small mouse named Pip. Noah snuggled closer, his small hand clutching her shirt, his eyes growing heavy. As she read the familiar words of her own creationist story of a small creature finding his courage against all odds, a profound sense of peace washed over her. The faint, phantom ache of her past was gone, replaced by the solid, warm weight of her son in her arms and the deep, unshakable knowledge of her own strength. She had not been rescued. She had done the rescuing herself. Her fairy tale, the saccharine illusion, had turned to ash, but from those ashes she had built a real Lithia life of truth, resilience, and a love more powerful than any lie. Her kingdom was small, but it was hers, and she was its free and thriving queen. The story of Ellie is a harrowing journey through the depths of betrayal, but it is also a powerful testament to the indomitable strength of a woman and a mother. She was stripped of everything she thought she knew: her home, her security, her love. But in the ashes of her old life, she discovered a power she never knew she possessed. Her story is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and abandoned, we have within us the capacity to not only survive, but to rebuild, to reclaim our narrative, and to emerge stronger than before. If Ellie's fight for her and her son's future moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of resilience, survival, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.